after today's date that will no longer be using initials in this matter, correct? Correct.
Okay, so, wow, you sent over a ton of info on this case. It's, pretty heavy stuff. We're diving deep into the Carson Peters Berger case.
Right.
This teenager, accused of murdering 10-year-old Lily Peters.
Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin.
Yeah, Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, back in April 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And the big question, the core issue here is, should he be tried as an adult or as a juvenile?
And that's a question that has like sparked debate across the country. I mean, the details
It's a tough one.
of this case are horrific.
Absolutely. So it starts, with Lily just riding her bike home, right, from her aunt's house.
Right.
14-year-old Carson was with her.
With her, yeah.
But she never made it home.
Never made it.
And her father found her bike.
It's abandoned by the woods.
Abandoned, yeah, near the woods, which of course led to this massive search.
Huge search.
Tragically, they found her body the next day.
Yeah. The criminal complaint is, it's tough to read.
It's awful.
It details, strangulation, blunt force trauma, and signs of sexual assault.
It's really rough.
And given how severe the crime is, Wisconsin law, automatically puts it in adult court.
Right. Because he's older than 10.
He's over 10.
Yeah.
So he's facing potentially a life sentence, right? If convicted.
A life sentence.
That's heavy. That's a lot for anyone to process, let alone a teenager.
Right.
But the defense is trying to change that.
They are.
They are. They're pushing for this reverse waiver,
right,
to move it to juvenile court.
Exactly. They want it back in juvenile court. And their strategy, their whole case is built around the idea that Carson should be tried as a juvenile because of his background and his mental state.
Right.
They're painting this picture of a child who's experienced a lot of trauma.
Right. And it's not just like typical teenage angst.
Right.
We're talking like deep-seated trauma.
Deep-seated trauma, yeah.
The defense has laid out some pretty disturbing details about his upbringing. His father was in prison.
Oh, wow.
For possession of child pornography.
That's heavy.
Yeah, there was a messy divorce when Carson was just 2. And then on top of that, there are allegations of neglect, physical and emotional abuse.
It's a lot.
It's a lot for anyone, let alone a developing child.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. And the defense is saying this trauma is central to the case.
It is.
Right. It's not just a sob story.
Right.
They're connecting it to his ability to even understand the crime.
Exactly. That's their core argument.
Right.
They're saying all this trauma, it impacted his brain development.
Right.
Especially when it comes to like emotional maturity.
Right.
And his ability to form intent.
Which, legally speaking, that's mens rea, right?
Mens rea, yeah. Basically, like, did he understand the consequences of what he was doing?
Right. So for our listener, mens rea is a crucial part of proving a crime.
It is.
It's the mental state, right?
Yeah. The mental state. A guilty mind.
Showing they acted with a guilty mind.
Right.
The defense is saying that Carson's trauma prevented that development to the point where he might not have had that capacity to form that guilty mind.
Right.
It's a fascinating argument.
It is.
But also incredibly disturbing. But how are they trying to prove this?
Well, they brought in like a whole team of psychologists to testify.
Okay.
And some of their assessments are pretty startling. One diagnosed him with autism spectrum disorder and anxiety, claiming that his clinical needs couldn't be met in an adult prison.
Right.
Another diagnosed him with persistent depressive disorder.
So they're establishing a history of mental health issues.
They are.
But how does that translate to his ability to understand, how serious, how heavy the gravity of this crime?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Another expert evaluated his social functioning.
Yeah.
And despite being 14 at the time, they concluded that he functioned more like a kindergartner.
Wow.
His emotional maturity was estimated to be somewhere between 4 and 6 years old.
Wait, a 14-year-old with the emotional maturity of a kindergartner?
Yeah.
That's a huge gap.
Massive gap.
How on earth can court reconcile that with such a horrific crime?
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Can a juvenile, even with, developmental challenges, really grasp, truly understand the magnitude of such an act?
Right.
Are they fully culpable? It's a legal and ethical minefield, and initially The judge denied the reverse waiver.
Kept it in the adult system.
Kept it in adult court.
But the defense wasn't going to back down.
No. They appealed.
So they appealed. Okay, let's get into that confession.
Right.
The prosecution's really leaning on that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, the court documents detail this chilling confession.
Right.
Where Carson allegedly confessed to police.
Mm-hmm.
He reportedly told them he planned to rape and kill Lily. He described the attack, punching her, hitting her with a stick, strangling her,
yeah,
and attempting to sexually assault her. He even admitted to hiding her body. It's a lot.
That's disturbing. Truly disturbing. So it sounds like an open and shut case, right?
Yeah.
But the defense is challenging this confession, right?
They are, and it's a smart move considering Carson's alleged developmental delays.
Mm-hmm.
They're questioning, like, can a 14-year-old functioning, arguably at a much younger level, can they even really grasp, the weight of confessing to something like this?
Right.
Like, were there leading questions?
Right. Is there coercion?
Yeah. Was there any coercion during the interrogation?
You have to wonder. I mean, the power dynamics there, especially with a juvenile who might be more susceptible to suggestion or intimidation.
Right. Exactly.
But even with those questions around the confession, the prosecution still has pretty strong evidence, right?
They do.
I mean, DNA, witness testimony.
DNA evidence linking Carson to the crime scene.
Right.
Found his DNA on Lily's body.
And they have witnesses, right?
Witness testimony placing Carson and Lily together before she disappeared.
So how can the defense counter that kind of forensic evidence? Witness testimony, it seems like a real uphill battle.
It is. It's a tough spot. But their best bet is to keep hammering on Carson's mental state at the time of the crime.
Right.
They need to somehow convince the jury that his developmental delays and maybe his alleged pornography addiction, that these factors created a situation where, tragically, Lily died, but without the premeditation for first-degree murder.
Right. So is their goal to get a lesser conviction, something that avoids the automatic life sentence?
I think so. It seems like that's the strategy.
Right.
They're walking this fine line. They're acknowledging, tragedy of Lily's death, but arguing that his mental state makes him less culpable.
Mm-hmm.
It's risky.
It is high risk, high reward.
High risk, high reward. Yeah. If they can cast enough doubt on that premeditation, then maybe the jury considers a lesser charge. Second-degree murder, manslaughter even.
That would still mean, a significant sentence, obviously, but it would avoid that automatic life sentence.
Exactly.
But with all the evidence and that confession, can they really sway a jury that much?
It'll be tough, no doubt. And that's why they might also try pushing for a change of venue.
Right.
This case has gripped Chippewa Falls and the surrounding area.
Yeah, it's been everywhere.
So much media coverage, so much public outrage. It's going to be really hard to find an impartial jury.
Right. A change of venue could make sense then. Moving the trial somewhere where there hasn't been as much media saturation could help ensure a fairer trial.
Yeah.
But even with that, you still have the challenge of that evidence, that mountain of evidence.
And that's where the expert testimony becomes so crucial. We talked about those psychologists who evaluated Carson, testified about his developmental delays. If they can really tie those delays to his actions, maybe they can shift the jury's understanding.
Of his intent.
Of his intent, yeah. His culpability.
Right. So it's almost like a battle of the experts then.
It is.
Both sides presenting these interpretations and trying to win over the jury. It's fascinating in a really unsettling way. This whole case, it raises a much bigger question, doesn't it?
It does.
About the fundamental purpose of the justice system.
Right. Is it purely about punishment? Or is there a responsibility to consider rehabilitation? Especially with a juvenile. Especially a juvenile who might have been, deeply affected by trauma.
That's a huge question, and it's something we'll keep exploring. When we come back for our final segment, we're back. And, this case, it really sticks with you.
It does.
It's hard not, think about the what ifs and just the ripple effects, this tragedy has had on everyone involved.
Absolutely. And as we've been discussing this case, it's not just about the legal technicalities.
No.
It really forces us to grapple with some incredibly complex questions about trauma, mental health, rehabilitation, particularly when it comes to juvenile offenders.
The defense has really focused on Carson's alleged pornography addiction, arguing that it played a role in the crime. But that's tricky territory, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's a claim that needs to be approached carefully. I mean, while there's some research that suggests a link between, pornography consumption and certain behavioral issues,
Right.
especially in individuals with pre-existing vulnerabilities.
Right.
It's really crucial to avoid generalizations.
Right. We can't jump to conclusions
Oh, no.
or use this case to make sweeping statements about, pornography and violence.
Yeah.
But it does raise questions, doesn't it, about the role, if any, that exposure to certain types of content might play in shaping a young person's development and behavior.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for open conversations about media literacy, healthy sexuality, and the potential risks of unrestricted access to online content, especially for young people. Who might be more susceptible.
Right. And it kind of circles back to that bigger question we talked about earlier.
Yes.
What's the real purpose of our justice system?
Right.
Is it simply about punishment? Or should we be aiming for something more? A system that also prioritizes rehabilitation and addresses the root causes?
That's the million-dollar question. There's always going to be tension between those two objectives, punishment and rehabilitation. But cases like this, they really force us to examine our values and to consider whether a purely punitive approach is truly effective, especially with young offenders. I mean, if trauma and mental health issues are contributing factors, shouldn't we be focusing on those, addressing those underlying issues?
The experts in this case, they made some compelling points about the effects of trauma
They did.
on brain development, especially in adolescence. They talked about how early adversity can really impact like impulse control, emotional regulation, decision-making.
And the science backs that up. We're learning more and more about the lasting impact of childhood trauma, how it can literally change the brain, its structure, its function. And this knowledge, it really should be informing how we approach juvenile justice.
It feels like we're at a crossroads. The traditional like tough on crime approach, it might not be the most effective way or even the most just way to deal with these young offenders who've experienced, real trauma.
I think you're right. This case highlights the need for a more nuanced approach, a more holistic one that takes into account the individual circumstances, the impact of trauma, the potential for rehabilitation.
So where do we go from here? What does that more nuanced approach actually look like in practice?
Well, it means investing in early intervention programs, addressing trauma and mental health in kids and teenagers, more support for at-risk youth and their families, and, exploring alternative sentencing. That focuses on rehabilitation, reintegration, rather than just, locking them up and throwing away the key.
It's complex. There's no easy fix. But this case, it's a powerful reminder that we need to keep asking these questions, keep pushing for a justice system that's both fair and humane.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that justice, it's not just about courts and laws, it's about creating a society that supports everyone, especially the most vulnerable.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and I know this is a lot to take in. What stands out to you most from this deep dive?
I think, for me, it's just realizing that every case, no matter how awful, it involves real people with complex lives, complex stories. We can't lose sight of that. And while justice and accountability are essential, we also need to approach these situations with empathy, with a willingness to understand, what contributes to this behavior.
This case has really made me rethink things, my own assumptions about the justice system, how we treat juvenile offenders. We still have so much work to do.
You do, but by talking about it, by engaging with these tough issues, we can start to make progress towards a more just and compassionate system for everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your insights. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you a deeper understanding of this case and the bigger picture, the conversation around juvenile justice, trauma, rehabilitation. It's far from over. And we encourage you to keep exploring these topics, keep forming your own opinions. Thanks for joining us.